In the United States, there are once again negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation. At the same time, Europe seems to fear betrayal from the Americans and is looking for funding for Kyiv. About this, as well as about the searches involving a member of parliament and about the trial of the suspect in the murder of a serviceman in Lviv, will be covered in the TCH final news broadcast. And on the United News Marathon, Channel 1+1 is broadcasting. And here are the most relevant updates on the 1,381st day of the full-scale war. A 12-year-old boy was killed and his parents were wounded. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, Russians attacked this family's house and neighboring homes in the Sinelnikivsky district with drones. And in the Nikopol district, the enemy targeted drones, artillery and Grad rockets at an elderly man, wounding him. 5 apartment buildings, private houses and cars were damaged. In Kramatorsk, Donetsk region, a drone struck a gas station and injured a man. Due to drone attacks on civilian vehicles, there are 2 victims each time. In Kostiantynivka, Rai, Oleksandrivka and Lyman, there are wounded, and in Sloviansk as well, there is a lot of destruction there. 12 people were injured by the Russians in the Kherson region. Komishani and Bilozerka came under fire. 2 local residents were injured and another 9 were hurt in Kherson and the suburbs. There, 2 apartment buildings, 11 private houses, a perinatal center, a cell tower, a bakery, and a gas pipeline were damaged. 2 people were wounded in Zaporizhzhia region. A man was injured by a cab strike and a woman was hurt by an explosive dropped from a drone. Today, the region endured nearly 800 Russian attacks. There is no encirclement in Mirnohrad or Pokrovsk. The defense forces are working on expanding logistical corridors there. This was stated by the commander of the 7th Air Assault Corps, Yevhen Lasichuk, on the air of the Marathon, United News. However, the situation in this direction is quite difficult. The Russians are relentlessly infiltrating the neighborhoods of Pokrovsk. In Mirnohrad, they are amassing forces in the south and east of the city and are trying to penetrate the central districts. The situation in Vovchansk has also worsened. The enemy has crossed the Vovcha River and is trying to push our forces out of this city in the Kharkiv region. And near Siversk, things are getting increasingly difficult. In this direction, the Russians once again shot one of our prisoners in the Sviatopokrovsk area. This is being reported by deep state analysts. Meanwhile, in Kupiansk, the situation is gradually stabilizing. Sources for TSN on this section of the front report that this is to the benefit of the Ukrainian defense forces. At the same time, several enemy armies are continuously attacking the front line in the Oleksandrivka-Huliaipole directions. The occupiers are doing everything they can to capture 2 settlements on the border of Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, Huliaipole and Pokrovsk. Our soldiers are putting up fierce resistance, but the enemy's numbers are overwhelming, and Russian vehicles are exploding by the hundreds in this sector every day. The 423rd Battalion of Unmanned Systems. The Scythian Griffins is one of the units holding back the onslaught of the occupiers here. The fighters admit it's extremely difficult, but they insist that's no reason to give in. In what conditions and how exactly do the heavy bomber pilots of the 423rd Battalion they destroy? The enemy was seen by the film crew of TSN correspondent Oleksandr Motorny. During this segment, a QR code will appear on your screens. This is for collecting donations for drones, equipment, and repairs of remotely piloted systems. Watch.
With a carbine out the window at top speed, they race along the battered roads of eastern Zaporizhzhia every day to their fellow drone operators. Each one takes a position and rushes off. They speed toward the Hydro River, which flows through Pokrovsk in Dnipropetrovsk region and through Huliaipole in Zaporizhzhia. To the east of it, for the Scythian Griffins of the 423rd Separate Battalion of Unmanned Systems, the line of combat engagement now runs.
The enemy is advancing very intensively and actively in all directions, especially in this particular area. Huliaipole, because the enemy's objective is Huliaipole, and their goal is to reach Pokrovsk in Dnipropetrovsk region.
The battalion commander does not conceal the Ukrainian defensive line. Around the sector where Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions meet, forces from 4 different Russian combined arms armies are attacking simultaneously, and the enemy infantry keeps advancing there without stopping.
They are putting maximum pressure from both sides using a large number of personnel and a significant amount of UAVs. Over the past 2 weeks, the weather has helped them a lot. For literally 2 weeks in a row, there was a very thick fog. Day and night, morning and evening. As you understand, these are our eyes, this is our visibility, this is the active work of our UAVs.
What can you start?
Red, waiting for confirmation.
Don't drink.
We can clearly see that small shed. And now, at this very moment, we are just working at our absolute full capacity on the relentless assaults because they truly keep coming and coming without any cessation. They simply do not stop at all. And how long has this been going on? Well, it's been a month, maybe more. More, probably almost 2 months. Is it every day?
Almost every day, yes, constantly. They're assaulting right now.
In the brief breaks between devastating enemy KB strikes, a lone motorcycle swiftly flew into that area, making its way through.
KBs all along the front line. Wherever we sit, KBs are our constant.
With attacks by Russian FPVs swarming over Ukrainian positions almost like a hive.
Oh, it's quickly running away now. I have very carefully pushed it right out. Pushed it out, yes. Pushed it out, yes. And you were walking like this, you can't see.
So, taking advantage of every opportunity, when the fog lifts, the harder crew sends out the vampires to work.
We tie up a couple of them, 2 or 3. Then you can do a little.
In very recent weeks, it was mostly about personnel, holding back fierce assaults and launching concentrations of enemy troops.
Is he there on the spot? Because I haven't seen him. They're both there, both on the spot.
They're moving forward in 2s or 3s, like pencils, so to speak, slowly advancing. Some were stopped, others are coming from behind. Yes, that's it.
That's it, they're right here. They're untying the camera now, sometime at night.
They're gathering together, accumulating within some dugout or building structure, so we will hit them a little bit.
Aim directly for the very middle. See the precise spot. There are actually 4 of them. On our fronts, it's infantry, motorcycles, and very rarely vehicles. Heavy equipment that doesn't make it here so far.
For any enemy movement that the 423rd Battalion's reconnaissance is able to spot, Guard assures, either they or their comrades immediately take off. With FPV drones, or they bomb the occupiers with their vampires. But as Barney, the pilot of the heavy bomber from the 423rd Battalion, frankly admits, there are really a lot of Muscovites, and they just don't run out.
There are so many of them, so many troops. That's why they move in small groups to secure a position somewhere to reinforce. They gather together and gradually move forward, but
the number of occupiers the Scythian Griffins assure is no reason not to attack the enemy. Just last month, the warriors of the 423rd Battalion of Unmanned Systems turned over 700 Muscovites into the very best, eliminated them. Reporting from the Pilski sector of the front in Zaporizhzhia, Oleksandr Motorny, Alexander Shian, and Serhiy Shportila, TSN 1+1. Rafon, United News.
And today, once again, we have a reason to thank the volunteers. On December 5th, Ukraine, together with the world, celebrates International Volunteer Day, a holiday established by the UN General Assembly in 1985. In Ukraine, over the past 12 years of war, it has taken on a special, vital significance because the volunteer movement has become like a mobile reserve army and an integral part of national defense. When volunteers provide, in particular, the military with everything they need, from drones and vehicles to gear or medicine, their personal contribution is especially significant. For their volunteer assistance in the development of the volunteer movement, the President honored 45 volunteers with the prestigious Golden Heart Award. 7 Ukrainian children have been brought back home from Russia. At the border, they were met by representatives of the Ombudsman's office. All the children are between 8 and 16 years old, and almost all of them ended up in Russia after the start of the full-scale invasion. Some were taken from then-occupied territories to the aggressor country by their parents or even by strangers, and some had been living in Russia even before 2022. And it was there that they lost their parents. Ukrainian representatives do not conduct direct negotiations with Russia regarding the return of the children. Today's return, for example, happened thanks to a letter from Melania Trump, which, as you may recall, the US president handed to Putin back in August in Alaska, and in which she asked for the children to be returned. Not all of the returned children understand Ukrainian, because they lived in Russia for a long time, having ended up there 4 years ago or even earlier, and the local propaganda has already had its effect. My authorized representatives of the Verkhovna Rada for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, is with us live right now. We'll be able to ask for more details about everything. Good evening. Thank you for joining the broadcast.
Good evening, studio. Good evening, Ukraine.
So in what condition, both physical and psychological, did these children return? And is rehabilitation provided for them? And if so, what kind?
Absolutely. After their return, all children go through the Child Rights Protection Center, which is a structural unit of our institution. There, a multidisciplinary team first assesses the psychological state in which the children have returned, what is happening with their families, who needs additional social support, and what needs to be done by state authorities to ensure the children can recover as quickly as possible. Thank you. They have reintegrated, so to speak, into Ukrainian society. I will be honest, there are no particular complaints regarding their physical condition. The only thing is, there was one girl. How she ended up on the territory of the Russian Federation at all is unclear. She was living in Ukraine together with her father. After the Russian Federation launched its full-scale aggression, the girl and her father came under Russian shelling. Both were wounded. They were taken to the territory of the Russian Federation, where they received medical assistance, but the father died. And the girl was left alone in the territory of the Russian Federation. Her documents had already been prepared, and she was essentially being sent to a Russian orphanage. And at this point, I was approached. Relatives and close ones contacted the Ukrainian ombudsman, and we helped to bring the girl back. We also brought back 2 twin boys. In the same way, they ended up in the territory of the Russian Federation because of the start of Russian aggression. They were living with their mother in Ukraine. Then, under coercion, as far as we know, the mother left for the Russian Federation with her 2 sons, and unfortunately, the mother died there. And so, the 2 twins were also being prepared to be placed in a Russian orphanage. Similarly, the boys' biological aunt reached out to us, and we brought them back. To be honest, Ukraine only sees the final stage, when the children are physically returned to Ukraine. In reality, this is a long-term effort, complex, multi-layered, and challenging. It involves many intermediaries, and our institution was directly responsible for all these children. We are immensely grateful, truly. We have support and special attention from the First Lady of the United States. She helped us, and our traditional communication channels and intermediaries also assisted, because the return of each child required separate documentation and the preparation of an individual package. As for the documents and individual communications, the Russian side decided to group them together, and then, so to speak, return them all at once, but in reality, the return of each of these children took many months.
So could you please tell us, you mentioned Melania Trump and the letter that actually helped bring these children back. Can you share any details? Was it a specific list of these children, or was it a general request to return children? And in general, is there any universal mechanism for such situations? Is Ukraine trying to get its children back?
Thank you very much for your question. In fact, it is a key one. For some reason, everyone in the world thinks that if the return of Ukrainian children has started, it means that some universal approach or universal mechanism is working, one that delivers effective results. In reality, that's not the case. Every time it's a separate story. Every child is a separate story, separate negotiations, a separate set of documents. Regarding the involvement of the US and Melania Trump personally, first of all, we are very grateful to her for actually raising this issue at her level. It's not just a letter. What was shown publicly is just part of it. there is also a lot of work that, at least as of today, remains outside the public eye, so to speak. But that doesn't mean it's any less effective or less important to us, on the contrary. But we will probably be able to share many of the details after the war is over and all our Ukrainian children have returned. Now,
Finally, allow me to ask one more brief and delicate question. The film crew, as well as Yasin, who welcomed these children, noticed that almost all of them speak Russian. Do they understand Ukrainian? And what is even more important, perhaps even more so than that, has propaganda had time to influence them, telling them that Ukraine is the enemy and so on? Is there any kind of adaptation program? What in general awaits these children next? Do you perhaps know what plans their families have?
I want to reassure everyone, no matter how hard Russian propaganda tries, they are not succeeding in reprogramming Ukrainian children against Ukraine. We can see this not by the language they speak. It's understandable that when children, especially very young ones, spend several years communicating exclusively in Russian and are under pressure, both the teachers at the schools they attend and the people around them, it's clear that all the news, everyone there communicates in Russian, because if you speak Ukrainian, at the very least, you could be physically punished, and at worst, you could be accused of being a Ukrainian spy and thrown in prison. All the more so because this also applies to Ukrainian children and teenagers. That's why the children speak Russian. But we see that when the children see they're being greeted with our Ukrainian flags, it's very easy to see their genuine reaction. They all start to smile. They all start running forward, hugging their relatives and loved ones. Russian propaganda definitely didn't scare them. They weren't afraid to come to Ukraine. It really does take some time for them to remember their Ukrainian language. No one is going to pressure them. And believe me, after we talk with the children, we constantly accompany and monitor the process of their reintegration. Yesterday, during the visit of the President of Cyprus to Ukraine, we had a bilateral meeting, and there were 8 children there whom we had also recently brought back. We announced this to Ukrainian society, showed it. It happened there a few months ago. 2 months ago, all the children were speaking Ukrainian yesterday. There were absolutely no problems at all. They all came wearing vyshyvankas, even though no one told them to wear them. This is their own message from the children. Such a sincere one, On the contrary, coming back from the territory of the Russian Federation, they want to show that they are Ukrainians, and they will start speaking our melodious Ukrainian language as quickly as possible.
Language. Thank you for these clarifications and for this information. The Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, is with us live to talk about the return of another 7 Ukrainian children. 2 months in custody without the right to bail. In Lviv, a preventive measure was chosen for the suspect in the murder of a military serviceman from the Territorial Recruitment Center. 37-year-old ATO veteran Yuri Bondarenko suffered a stab wound to the femoral artery on Wednesday evening during a document check of the detainee. Despite the efforts of the doctors, the serviceman died in the hospital the next day. The 30-year-old attacker was detained immediately and faces up to 12 years in prison. Today, the man was brought to court in handcuffs. He behaved calmly, spoke with journalists, and claims that he provided his documents, but the Reserve Plus app did not display them, so he called a lawyer. He says he does not remember stabbing the serviceman, but admits that the weapon did indeed belong to him.
I was waiting for my lawyer, arrived in a van, they opened the door, and right away I was sprayed in the face with pepper spray. The next thing I remember is that there were 3 or 4 of them. Law enforcement officers are being beaten. What happened the way it did, and of course that's very bad. I'm sorry that it turned out this way.
Happened. There are reasonable risks anticipated at this stage. Article 177 of the Criminal Procedure Code of Ukraine. Specifically, the first risk is the likelihood that the latter may go into hiding from the pre-trial investigation body and the possibility of influencing witnesses in this criminal proceeding.
The second day of consultations in the United States between the Ukrainian and American delegations. This follows the visit of the American Special Representative Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Kushner to the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Both sides are not providing any comments on the course of the negotiations. Donald Trump called the talks in Moscow very good and even stated that, in his opinion, Putin truly wants to end the war. TSN's own correspondent in the US, Olha Koshelenko, is joining us live from Washington to tell us more. Olya, hello. So, are there any updates about these new negotiations in Miami? What exactly is happening there?
Sviato, I can confirm, citing my own sources, that the Ukrainian delegation is in Miami, where the negotiations will take place. But unlike last Sunday, when part of the negotiations was open to the press, there were official statements from both sides, both at the beginning and at the conclusion, this time everything is closed. Neither side is really giving any comments. And as far as I know, the meeting between the head of the Ukrainian delegation, Rustem Umerov, and President Trump's special representative, Stephen Witkoff, as well as President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, took place the day before as well. And today, obviously, is a continuation of that. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who participated in previous rounds of negotiations in particular, is not present in Geneva or in Miami on Sunday. He is currently in Washington, where today he will also have some public events. The negotiations in Miami are indeed taking place as a result of the visit by Witkoff and Kushner to Moscow on Tuesday of this week. Although after that, the advisor to the Russian dictator Ushakov stated that no agreements had been reached and not even any specific wording was discussed, only conceptual proposals. As we can see, that was enough for the Ukrainian side. There have already been 2 days of discussions. The negotiators, I repeat, are not disclosing any details. The head of the Ukrainian delegation didn't even issue a formal announcement about the start of the negotiations, neither yesterday nor today. Members of the United States Congress were also not informed about the progress of the negotiations, even though they should have been. I had the opportunity to ask congressmen and senators for their thoughts on this, and you will hear from them next. For example, Lindsey Graham, the author of the so-called bill on sanctions against Russia, devastating sanctions as they say here, made it clear that now is not the time for a vote.
I'm ready to act, but let's give peace a chance. The 28-point plan was a joke. The 19-point plan is much more realistic, and it seems everything is moving in that direction, but we need to watch closely to make sure it stays that way.
Putin is just continuing to stall and drag things out. He's buying time for himself, playing football with America to seize more territory. Killing Ukrainian civilians in their homes and hospitals. These are absolute war crimes and acts of extreme cruelty. I hope we can impose sanctions as soon as possible.
Let me remind you that Donald Trump was the only one who commented on the negotiations in Moscow after Witkoff and Kushner returned from there. He called them very good and said that his negotiators got the impression that Putin wants to end the war, return to a more normal life, and trade with the United States. The Ukrainian side does not hide the fact that it would like to organize negotiations at the highest level, because some issues, the most sensitive ones, such as the question of territories, President Zelensky is ready to discuss only personally and only directly with Donald Trump.
This also concerns interaction with the American side at the highest level and a conversation or meeting between the President of Ukraine and President Trump. Of course, the President is ready at any time for any discussions. And as soon as we understand that we are not just in the process, but actually approaching a result, accordingly, any correspondence.
And that's all we have for now at this moment. Today, after 10 p.m. Kyiv time, Donald Trump will be signing executive orders in his office. And as a rule, he accompanies them with the opportunity for journalists to ask him questions. So I hope to return to the air with some news later, colleague.
Thank you, we'll be waiting. TSN correspondent in the United States, Olga Koshelenko, on the new negotiations between the American and Ukrainian delegations. Meanwhile, the German Chancellor is urgently heading to Belgium. In particular, he will have dinner with the country's Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, and will try to persuade him to actually make use of it. Russian frozen assets for aid to Ukraine. Is there a chance for a breakthrough, and why is the Belgian Prime Minister so unyielding? Everything known about the heated discussions in the EU surrounding a decision that is, in a way, fateful for Ukraine will be reported by Radio Svoboda correspondent Zoriana Stepanenko, exclusively for TSN.
Friedrich Merz has long been promoting the idea of a reparations loan for Ukraine. And on behalf of Germany, the largest economy in the EU, he is ready to provide all the necessary guarantees. Belgium, where most of the assets are actually held, requires such guarantees from all countries so that in the event of a lawsuit from Russia, it does not have to settle with them alone. Additionally, the Belgian leadership is concerned about possible retaliatory actions from Moscow, such as the confiscation of Belgian businesses in Russia. The European Commission has put forward a legal proposal on how to use Russian assets to help Ukraine and, according to Ursula von der Leyen, has addressed almost all of Belgium's concerns. Today, the head of the European Commission will join the leaders of the governments of Belgium and Germany. Essentially, the leaders will discuss for the first time the recently submitted concrete proposal from the European Commission. We have returned with additional security guarantees, with solutions that truly allow us to share the burden of responsibility in the spirit of solidarity. We initiated a dialogue which resulted in this proposal, but the dialogue continues. The European Commission proposes to use assets not only in Belgium, where most of them are located, but also in other group of 7 countries. They also propose to share the risks. Part of the loan, amounting to 90 billion euros, would be guaranteed by EU countries and another part by the bloc's general budget. To agree on the so-called reparations loan, the consent of all EU countries is not required. In other words, Hungary, for example, will not be able to block it, and the vast majority of EU members support the idea. Many high-ranking diplomats told Radio Liberty that a multi-billion-dollar loan could radically change the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine and thus strengthen its negotiating position.
This is a decisive issue, both in a positive and a negative sense. On the positive side, it has the potential to convince Putin that Ukraine will be financially supported for the next 2 to 3 years, so he will have to continue the war. Another 2 to 3 years. But if this does not happen, it will give Putin hope that European support for Ukraine may decrease, and that would be a catastrophe. This is a historic moment that could change the course of this war and perhaps even the course of peace negotiations. Putin will never get them back until he compensates for the damage caused to Ukraine. Now we need to focus on getting a decision from all 27 EU countries. I think we need to find a way, because otherwise Europe will not be part of this negotiation process.
However, the Prime Minister of Belgium doubts that Russia will pay reparations to Ukraine. And he explains it simply. Moscow will not lose the war. He considers any claims to the contrary to be an illusion. Moreover, DWR says it is undesirable for a nuclear state to lose, otherwise instability will arise there that is in no one's interest. The European Commission, responding to a question from Radio Liberty, declined to comment on these statements today. The Prime Minister of Belgium, whom Politico ironically calls Russia's most valuable asset, DWR also believes that the decision on a reparations loan could harm the peace process. By the way, Bloomberg has learned that the US did indeed consider the frozen Russian assets as a tool for negotiating peace proposals. For example, funding post-war investments in Ukraine under Washington's leadership. Therefore, according to Bloomberg, American officials tried to persuade several EU countries not to support the decision to use Russian assets. From Brussels, Zoriana Stepanenko, Radio Svoboda, especially for TSN 1+1. Marathon.